So my philosophy when it comes to learning new things is the good old sink or swim school of thought. Sometimes you just gotta jump into the deep end and hope your paralyzing fear of claustrophobia and the unknown doesn't kill you. See, the problem most people have with the Fusion page and even just DaVinci Resolve in general is that they just don't know where to start. You open up the Fusion page and you see all these different windows and nodes and lines and it can get confusing very quick. So let me hold your hand, let's get our feet wet, and we're gonna go over this really simple animation and I'll show you how to save it at the end so that you can use it on any project. And it's gonna be this guy right here. But Brandon, I don't want it that so I want to be able. Shut your. Well, slow down there, pal. Let's start with some rectangles. And before you click off, I promise this is going to be a great starting point to kickstart you in whatever direction you'd like to go in Fusion and DaVinci Resolve. Let's go and hop into it. So here's the example that we're going to use today. I have a separate tutorial video that I'm working on, and in the video, I call out a section in DaVinci Resolve for you to click on. And so what I'd like to do is highlight that section with this rectangle animation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up our video so that we're zoomed in on that area. So if you've never used the Fusion page or just don't even know where it is, if you look here on the bottom part of DaVinci Resolve, you have our different pages or workspaces, whatever you'd like to call them. I'm currently on the edit page. The Fusion page is going to be the magic wand icon down here on the bottom. If I click that, it'll take us into the Fusion page. Now we could actually start doing our animation here, but there's a couple issues with that. And if you don't care about those and you just want to get started, go ahead and skip forward. But let's cover those real quickly. One of the glaring issues is that the video looks way different. I've got my face up here for some reason and the video down below. When I do my recordings for tutorials, I will record my face cam and my desktop at the same time. And then once I bring it into DaVinci, I'll frame it so that you can't see one or the other. The reason it appears this way is because Fusion is not gonna see any of the properties or effects that we change on the edit page inside the Fusion page. Or if we had done some color correction, it won't see those color changes inside the Fusion page as well. So that can make things a little bit difficult for us. But if you go over to our frame stamps or timestamps where we would actually play this back, you'll notice that the frames over here are some very random numbers, and that's because this clip in particular is taken from a section out of the recording. It starts starting on frame 1, and when we start to do some of our animation works, the frames and where we keyframe things are going to matter if we ever wanted to duplicate this or translate it at a different point. So let's go ahead and go back to the edit page, and then let's get into the Fusion page the right way, and I can cover some more of the different areas of the workspace for you. So there's going to be two ways that we could do this. What I want you to do is go over to the top left where it says Effects and go over to the left menu where it says Effects. And the two options I was talking about are either a Fusion composition or an adjustment clip. For this particular example, either or could really work, but I'm going to actually use an adjustment clip. And if you've never used an adjustment clip or are unfamiliar with what they are, I would really get in the habit of starting to use them, because essentially what an adjustment clip will do is any property that you apply to an adjustment clip, it'll change for everything beneath it. So you can see if I click on my video and I go over to my inspector tab up the top right here, we still have our zoom and position settings already set up. But if I click on the adjustment clip, these are reset back to their default settings. However, if I wanted to, I could actually increase the zoom on the adjustment clip. And now this will apply a 1.56 zoom to everything underneath it. So if I were to drag this forward just a little bit, you can see that we're back to our previous zoom settings. And then if I were to play this, we're gonna zoom in as soon as our playhead hits the adjustment clip. I don't actually want it to zoom in, so I'm gonna go ahead and reset our property. Hello everyone, editor Brandon, editing Brandon's editing video. Just want to make a quick clarification because I feel like some people might be confused on the difference between adjustment clips and Fusion compositions. I'll link a separate video from this gentleman who explains them a little bit better, but essentially adjustment clips are meant to interact with things beneath them. So like I showed you, you could change the properties in the adjustment clips and it affects everything underneath it. Fusion clips are kind of meant to be their own entities, and they don't see things beneath them. It's a separate media file, and both will work for this example that we're going into, but adjustment clips just tend to be nicer for stuff like this because you can see the media underneath it. So again, if you have more questions, check out that separate video, but let's get back into the tutorial. So now with our adjustment clip above our video file, we can either just hit Fusion to go back into the Fusion page, And you'll see that our starting frame is now 0 instead of that 9,000 number or whatever it was. Or if you wanted to, you could right click on the adjustment clip and hit open in Fusion page. And one of the first things that you'll notice is that in our preview window, we actually have what we were showing on the edit page. We have that zoomed in part of our video. And we're on frame 0, which is again going to be nice when we start animating things and keyframing in the Fusion page. So let's go ahead and talk Fusion page real quick. If you've already used it and you just want to learn the animation, again, go ahead and skip forward. But for those of you guys who have never really touched this page, let's talk about a couple things. So right smack dab in the middle is our preview window. And over here on the right side is what we're showing on the edit page. And we actually have another section here to preview something else. We're not going to use it right now, but I can show you how you would use it a little bit later. If you would like to collapse this so that all you're seeing is our output, what I want you to do is go over to this preview window, go up top here to where this rectangle is. What that'll do is give us a single view. If you'd like to return that, it now looks like 2 rectangles, I guess. You could click that and it'll split up our preview window, but I like working with just one. We have our entire range of frames for this particular animation. It looks like we end on frame 308 and start on frame 0. We don't really need to worry about a lot of these other options up here. Over to the right, mine is fully expanded and I have my inspector tab, and this will give us properties for whatever nodes that we're working on. We also have our spline window, which we will use later, and our keyframe window. And then over in the top left, we have some of our different options. By default, I think it should be your media pool, and this will give you access to whatever you're using in this particular project. And then we also have our standard effects. These will be some that you already have on the edit page, and as well as any templates that you saved or LUTs that you've saved on the color page. Now down here on the bottom is our grid and it's our workspace. This is kind of like the big working area of the Fusion page. And this is kind of the part where a lot of people get scared to use Fusion. In essence, the way the node system works is it's a very visual representation of how things are connected to one another. If you're used to Adobe and the layer system, you kind of work from top to bottom. But in Fusion, you follow the arrows. So by default, when you use an adjustment clip, or even if you go into the Fusion page on an actual video file, not a Fusion composition, a video file, you'll have 2 nodes by default. You'll have your media in and media out. Media in represents any file footage that you're bringing into DaVinci that it's going to display. You can add other media in nodes, but by default, we start with one over here. And if I follow the output, which is going to be this wide square over here, all the way to the right, we have our media out, and the media out node is what gets displayed on the edit page or in your video, and it's the final result of your composition or your animation, your edit, however you like to call it. If I click the edge of this line and unconnect it, you'll see that we no longer have a display, and that's because our media in is no longer feeding in to our media out. If I go back to our output I can drag and connect that line back to our media out, and again, we have our display. And if you're ever confused as to what is this particular input or output for a particular node, all you gotta do is hover over your mouse over that input or output, and it'll preview what it's used for. And now all we're gonna do is we're going to input some things into this flow to add on top of our existing footage. And I think it's something that sounds a lot more difficult and weird and funky than it really is. Once you start using it, I feel like it's pretty intuitive, but I don't know. I come from a place where I've used software that uses similar stuff to this. So if you do end up having questions, please ask and I'll do my best to respond to people. Let's go ahead and just start doing some things inside Fusion. Now, if I use my middle mouse button, I can pan around so that we can kind of move this around. Your mouse wheel will scroll. I think it's Control and the mouse wheel will scroll in and out. And then your mouse wheel scroll will, I guess, move it up and down. So up top here, you have some pretty standard tools that you can use within Fusion. And if I wanted to, I could drag and drop one of these down and add a new node to the workspace. This is the brightness contrast node. If I wanted to, I could increase the brightness, but you'll notice that it doesn't change anything. And that's because it is not in our pipeline. It's not within our flow of output to input. If I wanted to introduce this into our Fusion composition, you can do 2 things. One, you can drag the output from our media in and connect it to the yellow input of our brightness contrast node, and then drag the output of that node into our media out. You can see now that we have our effect, and I can start changing some of these different properties. Or, and I'm gonna hit Control Z a couple times. A quicker way of doing this is by holding down the Shift key. I can drag this guy in, and when my mouse hovers over this pipeline, I can connect it and it'll connect. Real quick as well, I just realized that my nodes are kind of snapping to the different points. If yours aren't doing that, you can right click, go to arrange tools to grid, and that should make things nice and snappy for you. All right, so let's go ahead and make our rectangle box animation. And the way we're gonna do this might be a little different than what your brain is used to when it comes to creating shapes, because while DaVinci does have a rectangle tool, it's not meant for creating rectangle shapes. What it's meant for is cutting out rectangular shaped objects. Again, this is one of those things that sounds more confusing than it actually is. Just bear with me. So if you don't already do this, what I'd like you to do is get in the habit of hitting Control and space. And what this will do is bring up our tool menu. And the one that we're going to use is going to be a background node. And what a background node essentially will do for us in this situation is create a solid color. If I go over to my inspector tab, since I have my background selected, I can change the type to some of the different gradient options, but we're going to leave this as a solid color. And what I would like you to do is just pick whatever color that you want to use for your outline. So I like blues. I'm going to make mine a nice light blue, something like that. And again, you'll notice that we don't actually see our color on our preview window. And again, that's because it is not connected to our flowchart. But the nice thing about Fusion is if I wanted to preview this, I could hit the button 2. And you notice a couple things. One, now we have this white circle underneath it. And what that circle indicates is that this is the node we are currently previewing on window 2. By default, when we're in single view on this particular setup, we're using window 2. If I were to split this again by clicking this rectangle option up here, and I were to hit the 1 button, you'll see that now we're previewing on window 1. And that's where using the 2 preview windows can get kind of useful, because you can display different nodes on different windows when you're trying to look at certain parts of your animation. So you can display 2 different things. I could select my media out node and hit 2. And now we have our color and our media out both displayed on different preview windows. But again, I like working with 1 just because I'm simple like that. So I'm going to go back to our single view and preview our background node. And here's the way this is going to work. We are going to mask out this color to create our outline. And this is why, like, if you've never done something like this before, it can be a little funky to wrap your head around. So you can either go over to the rectangle tool right here and drag it down, or if you want, you can hit Control plus space and type in rectangle, and that'll give you your rectangle select tool. You'll notice at first, again, that nothing's changed, and that's because our rectangle node is not connected to anything. It's not affecting anything at first. I'm going to drag this above our background node, and then I'm going to take the output of our rectangle node and connect it to the blue input arrow of our background node. And this is normally the mask input for whatever node that you're using. A lot of nodes will typically have this. And now when I do that, you see that we cut out everything that's not within our rectangle. And this is essentially what masking is if you've never done something like this before. You remove areas that aren't a part of your selection. Okay, so now I'm going to click back on our rectangle node. And we're going to do a couple things to actually make this an outline. I'm going to uncheck solid in the inspector tab, and then I'm going to increase our border width. And you can increase your border width to be as big or as small as you would like it. Normally for me, I like it not too big, and then I'd like to add a little soft edge to soften up that outline a little bit. In our preview window, you can hit Control on the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. And if you want to reset your zoom, you can just go up top here to the zoom percentage and hit Fit, and I'll reset your window. And now we have our outline, and it doesn't have to be perfect or centered in the right spot initially. But the question is, how do we now bring this back in to show above our media in node? And the way we're going to do this is using a merge node. And you can think of merge nodes as ways of layering one visual on top of another. It's kind of like stacking layers if you were in Adobe, but in Fusion, we use merge. There's going to be 2 ways you could do this. One, you could actually hit Control space, type in merge, and then by holding down the shift button, I'm going to drag it and connect it into our pipeline. And then what we're going to want to do is take the output from our background node and connect it to the green arrow on our merge node, not blue, green. Blue would be to mask. Green is going to add this as the foreground or the object above our background. And at first, nothing changes, but that's because we are still previewing our background window. So if I wanted to go back to seeing our output, I need to click on our media out node and hit 2. There we go. We have both of them right there. The other way of doing this, and it's a little more snazzy, is if I delete our merge node, all I got to do is take our output from our background node and hover it over the output of our immediate in node, and that'll create a merge as well. Okay, so now we have the two displaying over each other. Let's reposition our rectangle and start the animating process. So I'm going to click on our rectangle node, and the properties I'm going to be looking for is this bottom section down here. We have our center, width, and height. I'm going to go ahead and move our center so that it is right around in the same ballpark. The way I'm moving it as well, if you've never done this before, you can click and drag to the left or right on the inspector panel to change a certain property. If you wanted to, you could also just go in the preview window and grab this arrow. I'm just in the habit of changing the properties using the inspector tab. All right, so it's a little too big for my liking, so I'm going to shrink it down as well. I don't know, something like that, so y'all can still see it, but it's a little bit smaller. And yeah, I don't know, something like that. Just it's not perfect, but for the purpose of this video, it'll be plenty fine. Alrighty, so now how do I animate it actually drawing on screen? Well, the nice thing about the rectangle tool and what we're going to use is this length property over here. So if I grab this property and bring it down, you can see that our rectangle is beginning to lose its shape. And all we're going to essentially do is keyframe this property, and all a keyframe means is that things are going to change. They're not going to stay the same. Our length property is going to change over time. Let me show you what I mean. Let me go ahead and zoom in so that this is nice and big for y'all. What I want you to do is make sure you are on frame 0 or starting frame. You can do this on wherever you want, but it's going to be easier if we start at the beginning. So start at frame 0, and then what I want you to do is go over to the length property, and there should be a little diamond next to all of these guys over here. And I want you to turn on the diamond for our length property. And you'll know you did it right if it turns orange. Now I work in the 60 frame per second world. So for me, if I wanted to animate this over the course of a second, I'm gonna go over to frame 60. You could drag your playhead over to frame 60, or you could even type it in here. And what we're gonna do is we're going to click on the keyframe again. What we just did is say, hey, DaVinci, we're going to change things from frame 0 to frame 60. Now, if I want to navigate back to where our frames are, I could always just drag my playhead and find frame 0 and find frame 60 so that it's nice and orange over here. Or you'll see that they have these little handles over here. And when you click on them, you can jump back and forth between your keyframes, which is really nice. So what I want you to do is jump back to frame 0 because we want our length to start at 0 and go all the way to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and change our length to 0. And now when I play this, this is going to start at 0 and end at a length of 1 at frame 60. So go ahead. There you go. And with that, you've now officially animated your first thing in DaVinci. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if this is your first thing you've animated. So to make this look a little bit better, we're going to do 3 things. I think we're gonna do 3 things. First is we're just gonna add a glow to it so that it's not quite as basic. Go ahead and hit Control Space, and I want you to do is type in glow. And you have a few options that pop up. The one I kind of like to use is soft glow. So go ahead and hit add. And because we had our background node selected, it's going to add it into our flow chain, fusion chain flow chart so that it's already a part of our effects. I'm gonna go ahead and play with these settings so that it looks kind of how we want it to look. You only really need to change the gain and the glow size. I don't know, something like that. That's one way to make it a little more pretty. You can hit Control Space and scroll through some of the nodes and start playing with things to just give it some different looks and effects. But for me, I like keeping it pretty basic because again, I am not very smart. I like to keep it simple. And the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna change our animation curve to feel a little less staticky. So it feels just, I don't know, a little more fluid. And this is something that you can do with anything that you start keyframing in DaVinci. To do that, go up top here and hit Spline. I'm gonna make my window just a little bit smaller, and I'm actually gonna condense our inspector tab. We got a little more real estate to play with. And by default, we don't see anything. It's for a few reasons. One, make sure that we click on our length. Any item over here that you've keyframed in the Fusion page will display on this list. And if you want to show some of those curves, you just gotta check it on. Now again, all we have is a flat line. That's because we're looking at frames like, I don't know, is this 5,000, 10,000? A quick way to fix this is to go ahead and hit these fit to window arrows over here, or zoom to fit, excuse me. Now we can see our spline, which is right now a straight line. Because the way keyframing works is when you indicate a change, DaVinci by default will linearly interpolate between those two values. Got all my engineers and math people out there. But this isn't realistically how a lot of motion and movement works. You know, there's a lot of easing in and easing out of certain motions depending on how things accelerate. And all we're gonna do, and you don't have to be an expert, it just makes things look a little bit smoother, is I'm gonna hit Control A to select our two endpoints and then hit S. And by hitting S, we've smoothed out our two lines. Now you can grab these two handles and change the animation however you'd like, but by having a nice ease in and ease out, we smooth out our animation. Now this is a subtle change, and if you'd like things to be more exaggerated, you could play with these handles to give you essentially any kind of feel that you like. So this would be fast acceleration and a nice easy slowdown. You can see at the end, we decelerate pretty heavy. To navigate this window, again, I can hit Control plus the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. I can grab the top axis and move it left and right to zoom in and out on this axis. Same with this guy as well. I'm gonna go ahead and hit Control A and then S to smooth these things out. Now here's where the spline window can get really useful. If I wanted to, say, make this animation a lot slower, one, I could just select this node and then change the time value to, if I want to do 2 seconds, 120, and that'll move it out 2 seconds. Let me hit Control Z to reset that. I could also grab this node, and by holding down the Shift key, I can keep the value but change the time that we can either shrink or subtract it. Or if you have something that's a little more complicated and using more keyframes, so you're changing a couple values and you got some elasticity, but you want to expand out how long it happens, hit Control A or select whatever nodes you'd like to change the time values for, and then go over here to the time stretch tool. And when this is enabled, all I have to do is grab our outermost bound and, oh, that's the playhead, and drag this out. And this will keep the proportions of your keyframes while just expanding or contracting that animation. Really useful. And again, this is like a very, very, very basic overview of the Fusion page and the spline tool, but to be honest, this is like a really easy, quick jumpstart way to get in and start doing some of your own animations. It ends up being a lot more intuitive once you just know where to click and find things. Okay, so that was step 2 to make this a little bit better. Let me go ahead and close our spline window for now so that we have a nice big node workspace. And again, if this is all that you're looking for, hopefully this helped. But we can do something really tricky and cool to make this even better. Now notice that when I did my preview that everything inside the box stayed the same brightness, but everything outside of it got a little bit darker. So that's what I'm gonna show you guys how to do. Now you could just copy and paste these two nodes and then do some finagling and that kind of stuff and make it work. But the problem that you'll end up finding is that you're gonna have to move 2 different rectangle nodes. So I'm gonna show you this really cool trick that'll make your life very easy. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna actually add another background node. Go ahead and hit Control Space, type in background, go ahead and add that guy in. And we're gonna need this to appear underneath our rectangle so that we're in between the outline and the video beneath it. And we can leave this to its default settings at first. And now what we're gonna do is, again, you could hit Control Space and type in merge to add another merge node. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag the output from our background node to the output of our media in and create a new merge node that way. Now let me refit my window real quick. And our video is now covered by this black background. But if I click on the background node, our second one over here, and I change down the alpha value, or which is essentially your opacity, and I bring that down, you can see that all we're doing now is just darkening the background. And you can set this to be whatever value that you would like. I'm gonna go ahead and make mine, I don't know, maybe we could do half. Again, you can change this to be whatever you'd like. Okay, so here's where some Fusion shenanigans can come in that might make your life a little bit easier. Now you might be thinking all we would have to do is copy and paste this rectangle node and then drag the output from that node back to the masking aspect of this background node. At first it doesn't work, but you're like, oh, I'm smart. All I gotta do is check on solid and then hit invert. And now we have our thing covered. But what happens if I wanted to reuse this later and our rectangle didn't belong there? Well, if I grabbed our rectangle node for our blue outline and changed its center position, we lose our highlighted background. You might be thinking, well, just recopy and paste it. True, you could do that, but I'm lazy. So let me show you a better way. Let me undo real quick. There's a way in the Fusion page to copy and paste a clone of a certain node so that when you change something in the original, it changes in the duplicate as well. And it's called instancing. The way to do that, and I'll show you how this works, is I have my first rectangle node selected. I hit copy, and then you can either right click and go to paste instance or hit Control-Shift-V. When we do that, we get this little teal vague outline of a line connecting to our rectangular node. And you see that says instance of rectangle 1, which is exactly what we want. You'll notice that when I click on our instance node, that all of its properties are highlighted in green. And so if I go back to our rectangle node and let's say change the Y position to 0.63 and the X to 0.29, and I go back to our instance, those properties are the same because we've essentially linked the two nodes. So let's go ahead and connect the output of our instance node to our dark background. And at first you're not seeing the effect that you want, but that's because we've instanced this border, not the solid darkened background. So if I were to hit 2 on our background node to preview what our instanced background looks like, you can see we have this dark shadow. When we hit 2 on our media out node again, but if I were to hit solid, you see that we also change it so that our original is solid as well because we've duplicated this. So how do we unlink just that property? I hit Control-Z. I'm going to click on my instanced node. Ooh, that's a mouthful to say. And I'm going to right click on solid and hit de-instance. Now, when I click that on, you can see that all we've done is change the solidity of our instance node. Now we need to invert it. So I'm going to right click on invert, de-instance, check that on. There we go. And now that we've set this up, I can move our rectangle around and you can see that we're highlighting different areas of our video, which is really cool. Well, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so we got one last thing to do and then we're done. We've created this amazing rectangle animation. When I go back to the beginning, you can see that we're already starting with our highlighted area and we don't want that. We kind of want it to darken as the square animates. So the way that we're going to do that is we're just going to animate the alpha. So with our background 2 node selected, go ahead and go back to frame 0, set a keyframe for the alpha. And then I believe we did the 120 frames or 2 seconds. Then again, set a keyframe, hop back to the beginning of the animation and turn our alpha to 0. So now if we play this back, now if you wanted to, you could go back to your spline tool and then check off our rectangle and check on our background alpha. You could select those, hit S to smooth it out, completely up to you, depends on how ambitious you are. But that is essentially it. You are now ready to take on the world of Fusion. I'm just kidding, it's still very scary out there. Okay, so how do we save this so that we never have to set this up again and we can use it in any video that we want? Real quick, sorry, unshaved, unshowered, editor Brandon here again. I just want to say real quick that I feel like I go through this section pretty quick. And I just wanted to preface this with saying that there are a lot of different ways to save presets and effects and templates within DaVinci Resolve. The way I'm going to show you is how to do it within the Fusion page. So we're going to save a node template so that you can use it in the Fusion page. If you're looking for another method, they're out there, just go exploring. And the way to do this is a little convoluted. There's not just a right click save as. So what I end up doing in the tutorial is I take you down the file path to get to the specific location. And that file path will be in the description. I just feel like when I go about doing this, I was tired recording it and I kind of go through it quickly. So sorry if there's any confusion. Let's get back into the video. Now there's going to be a lot of different ways to do this and people are going to say you should do it like this or do it like that. They're all probably right. You could create a macro with this, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple. So the first thing that I want you to do is I want you to drag and select these, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 nodes. Go ahead and drag and select those 7 nodes, right click, go to settings, save as. And what you should do is save this to somewhere that is easily accessible. This isn't the final destination, but it's just you want this to be in a spot where you can find it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just save mine to my desktop. We'll call this rectangle outline. Save. For whatever reason, DaVinci Resolve has two places that you can save effects, and they kind of display differently within DaVinci. So for instance, if I right click on this templates option and hit show folder, you can see that in my Windows Explorer that I don't have any of my folder options set up over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the full folder path in the description, but I have it saved to a notepad right here. I'm gonna copy that guy right there, close that, go to my file explorer and paste that in. Now you can see I have all my folders set up nice and neat. So what I would recommend you do is let's create a new folder. And let's name it, you name it whatever you'd like. I'm just gonna name mine temp. Go ahead and double click there. And now all I need to do is find my settings file, which is on the desktop, and drag and drop that guy there and give it whatever permission it needs. And now when I go back into DaVinci, and I go over to templates, expand that, you can see we have a temp section with our rectangle outline effect. And if I want, all I gotta do is drag and drop that guy down. There you go, it's all saved, ready to go. And now if you ever wanna get back to that same spot, you just need to right click on that folder and hit show folder. That'll take you back to that same section. But again, there's a lot of different ways to save settings and effects in DaVinci, including macros. So if you're curious if there's one better, I would Google how to save a macro in DaVinci. But I think I have officially overstayed my welcome. It is nighttime here, which means I gotta go. Hope that helped. If you guys have questions, I'll do my best to answer them, but I appreciate y'all. Peace.